going to talk to you today about exercising your horse. Depending on the age of your horse, you will do something different with them, and depending on their fitness level as well. This is Goldie. She is 31, and she came to us in need of putting on a little extra weight. One of the benefits of exercising your horse is to help them put on weight, along with giving them healthy lungs and a healthy heart, and helping to keep their mind sharp. We're going to go over some cavaletti pulls today, and what that will do is by her picking her feet up, it will help her to strengthen her shoulder muscles and her bottom muscles and help her back a little bit as well. Another exercise that we can do with older horses to help them strengthen their back muscles is to just scratch underneath their belly really hard, and it makes them lift their back up, and that will help them to strengthen these top line muscles. Finally, a last exercise we can do to help them keep their necks from getting stiff is to use a treat and help them to bend their neck back to keep it flexible and supple. We can also do it to the ground or back to the feet. And the more you do it, the more flexible they can get.
So Evie is taking Miss B over the cavaletti and saddle. Much like the groundwork that was done with Goldie, you can transfer that into the saddle and go over cavaletti, which will help them build up their muscles and learn them to use their hind end more. Miss B is pretty anxious to go over them. And you can use the cavaletti at different heights if your horse is able to do that. Usually when the horses come in and they're in a little bit bad shape, we start them off on the ground and we work them up.
Hi, my name is Lori, and this is Liberty. We call her Libby. She is a 6-year-old American Mustang. She was just recently put under saddle, so she's still in training. So today we're going to work with Libby on lunging. And what lunging means is that I ask my horse to go out away from me on a long lead and go around me. And as she's going around, I will ask her walk or trot or canter, sometimes with those words, other times with sounds. Lunging, I think, is good for them for a number of reasons. It helps them focus on the person who's working with them. It's good for their overall body health, muscles, their gut. Horses need to move, and so it's good for their digestion. It's great cardio. Obviously, the muscles is probably one of the biggest. And as an example, a horse like Libby, just like humans, horses have a strong side and a weak side. So Libby would be considered left-handed. She is much stronger on her left side than her right. So knowing that, we go into her training and the lunging with her to work her right side a little bit more than we would work her left side to try and get her balanced. Usually when I start with working with Libby, I will make sure that she's with me, make sure that her focus is on me before we get starting in the lunging. So we'll just do a little bit of walking, stopping, turning, to make sure that she's paying attention to me and not anything going on around her. So I will start out walking. I don't want her too far ahead of me or too far behind me. I want her to stop when I stop. I want her to back when I back. I want her to turn when I turn. And we'll go through this at a walk. We'll also do it at a trot. As you can tell, she does it a lot, so she has it down pat. One of the things I did learn with her is that they can get bored easily. So when you're working with them, you go through some exercises each time, but if they get it, if they've answered your questions correctly every time, then I just move on rather than go through it too much. Otherwise, she gets a little antsy. But then I will ask her to move off from me in a small circle at a walk. She's very sensitive. So as you can see, I didn't ask her to do that, but my hand flicked and the rope flicked, and she took it as a sign that I wanted her to trot.
Lori, while you're lunging, I have a question for you, and it's relative to your statement on trainers that can get their horses to go with body language only, which is amazing, I agree. But horses can learn up to about 100 verbal cues, and I think that verbal cues are very helpful with some horses who sometimes have attention deficit disorder and aren't always looking at you for your body language, and then the verbal cue is very helpful. It's always helpful as well if you have any kind of disability from your rider. So say they don't have strong enough legs to cue, and they can cue with a verbal cue to hoe or to go, walk or something like that. So verbal cues with horses in training, I think, is huge. But I also agree with Lori that training with body language is very important.
And I think the other thing that the verbal cues helps with tremendously is transferring the training you're doing on the ground into the saddle. Because anything we do on the ground, we should be able to then do that when we're on their backs. And I know for this one, not just the word trot, but a click, when you, like that. She takes that as her cue to move from a walk into a trot. So the verbal, I think, helps a lot, especially if we're trying to transfer any ground training into the saddle.
Hi, I'm Amy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about shelters for your horses. There are two different types of shelters that you can use. One is a run-in, and one would be a stall, and we'll see that later. So for a run-in, the first thing you want to do is determine how big of a shelter you need. How many horses will you have, and how tall are your horses? As you can see, we have a very tall shelter here, so that any of our horses, whatever size they are, they can fit. And it's wide enough that if we have multiple horses in here, they will have room to stand to get out of the elements. And if we have a hay net, they can all reach it. The next thing you want to do for your shelter is to make sure that the opening of the shelter is not facing in the general direction of where harsh winds and rain would be coming in, because then they're not out of the elements. So that would be one of the things that you need to determine before you place your shelter on your property. So we have this facing in the direction where the wind is going to be hitting the back of the shelter. The next thing you need to do is make sure that your frame of your shelter, and this is the board down here, will be anchored so that if the wind is too heavy, it can't be tipped over. Or if the horses are kicking, they won't accidentally kick it over and cause damage to themselves. You can see we have metal on the outside, all the way down, so that it doesn't rot, wind, rain, snow, keeps it safe. On the inside, you will notice we do have what's called a kickboard, and that's boards all the way around, up to about where their shoulders would be. Believe it or not, if a horse kicks, it can kick through the metal, and that would cut and cause severe injuries. So we need to make sure that we do have a kickboard around the entire area of the shelter. You also want to make sure that wherever your shelter is, that they still have access to water and their food, whether it be their grain or their hay nets. And sometimes when the weather is really bad, you want to bring your hay net inside so that they will still have the opportunity to graze throughout the day. Next, I'll show you a stall where you can consider that shelter for your horse as well. Again, you're going to need to remember safety first. So just like when we were talking about a run-in, you're going to have a kickboard all the way around. Again, if they kick, they could cause damage to themselves. You're going to want a gate that opens easily and closes securely. You don't want any loose horses. Now here on the property at the rescue, we don't typically stall our horses for long periods of time. If there's a medical condition that we need to stall our horses so that they can be monitored, or if they have definite dietary needs that we need to be here to watch them while they are eating, then we absolutely will utilize this. If this is the only shelter that you have and it's really bad weather, then by all means, go ahead and use that. Again, we want to make sure that our stall is tall enough and wide enough. You normally only put one horse in a stall at a time. Safety is our utmost importance. Again, as we talked about for our run-ins, you want to make sure that they have access to water and hay. Because they can't leave the stall, we are their first choice to make sure that they have hay and water. You can either use a hay net and hang it. Make sure that the hay net does not touch the ground. A horse can step on it, trip, and that causes issues. Or you can have a bin, which is in the corner, and it would be filled. Again, you want to make sure that it's heavy enough that the horse isn't going to move it, tip over, and cause damage. As far as water is concerned, what we do is we hang our buckets over the edges. And you'll see a cord here. This is a heater. In the winter, the water will freeze. It's a very small bucket. So you want to make sure that your water isn't going to freeze. Otherwise, the horse won't be able to drink. And we put them in the corner so that they won't be able to tip it over as readily. You'll notice that it is bent. Horses love to scratch. So this is because we have a couple horses that are scratching their sides on their water bucket. But the water is still in here. One last thing, especially in your run-in, you want to make sure that the bedding and your stall mats are clean. You can see we do need to clean up this stall. The bedding is typically sawdust. It keeps everything absorbed and easy for us to clean up, but that does need to be cleaned up and then freshened up. Try to do that at least once a day.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm going to talk to you about feeding horses. So, what do horses eat? Horses eat a mixture of grass and hay and grain. We prefer them to get the majority of their nutrition from hay. During the summer, obviously, they have a lot of grass, and in the winter, they don't get that. Grass and hay provide the roughage that horses need to keep their system moving and to provide energy to keep them warm, especially during the winter months. It's best to feed them roughage throughout the day to help keep them warm. If we fed them in the morning, they would eat everything and they wouldn't have anything until the next morning. So we do feed the horses twice a day. There are two types of hay. One is grass and the other is alfalfa. Alfalfa is a richer hay, and the horses love to eat it, but it isn't good for them. It causes digestive issues because it's too rich. And it also causes something called laminitis, which causes the hoof and the leg to be painful and the horse has trouble walking. A mixture of grass and alfalfa hay is best for the horses to eat. And they eat an average of 15 pounds in the day. During the winter, their feed requirement goes up because we do like to keep them warm, so they need the hay to do that. Some of the horses could have a problem with a condition that is similar to asthma in adults that causes them to cough during humid weather. So during the summer when it's really humid, if we notice the horses are coughing, we could take the additional step of steaming the hay to reduce the dust and the alfalfa flying around, so it's better for the horses to eat. Grain is not required for horses to eat unless they're not getting their nutritional needs met from their hay. We can supplement their nutrition in different ways, and too much grain will cause diarrhea and a condition called colic, where the food is no longer moving through the system, it becomes impacted, and is fatal if is not caught soon enough. So we measure the grain to make sure that we're feeding them consistently and accurately. Our younger horses, we monitor the food that we're eating because we don't want to cause them to get too fat when they're young. If we notice that they are gaining too much weight and they're eating grain, we would stop the grain for a while, see if we can back some of that weight off. If that isn't enough, we can also reduce the hay that we give them. So in that situation, we would weigh the hay and make sure that we're all giving them the same amount, but they're not going to eat too much. They're not going to overeat. Older horses, we monitor close to make sure that they're having their nutritional needs met. Just like we don't eat the same food from infancy through older adulthood, the horses don't either. So you can see behind me we have a large number of supplements. All of our horses here are on a different diet because they do have different nutritional needs. Now, if the horses, we notice that they're getting too skinny, a lot of people think that they should feed the horses sweet feed because the horses like it. They eat a lot of it, but it has too much sugar in it and it doesn't provide enough nutrition. So they're giving them more and more grain, the horse is eating more and more, and they're still not putting on weight. It becomes a vicious cycle. And the horses could have a condition called insulin resistance, and that's the same thing that people get, where it's similar to diabetes. When we notice the horses are losing weight, we pay special attention to that to try to determine the cause. You may not know, horses need to see the dentist just like people do. If the horse is eating and we notice the hay is falling all out of their mouth, they probably have a problem with their teeth. The vet could come out and look at that. Sometimes they get points that make it very painful for them to chew, which will cause the food to fall out. They even have their teeth pulled. We have horses here that have no teeth at all. So how do they eat? We have to give them a special diet. Their hay is chopped into small pieces so they can eat that or they won't choke on it. And we would take their grain and soak it to give them more like a protein smoothie so that they won't choke on their food. Horses should be fed on a regular schedule, especially if they have chronic illness. If they miss a feed or if they get too hungry, that is just enough to cause the chronic illness to flare up, and then we're chasing that problem. Salt is another important thing that the horses need to have to conduct electrical impulses in their muscles. We give all of the horses a salt block, and they seem to know when they need extra salt. They just go and lick on their salt block. During the summer months, we also give them a little bit of extra salt in their grain when we feed them because it causes them to be thirsty, and we want to make sure that they're drinking and not becoming dehydrated. Water. The horses need to drink between 10 and 15 gallons of water every day, and that amount increases when it's hot out or when the horse is exercising a lot.